In the intricate tapestry of life, it is often the moments of quietude that herald the most significant transformations. C.S. Lewis, a master at deciphering the human soul, believed that God rarely calls to us through the rumble of thunder, but prefers to whisper in the gentle breezes of our daily experiences. As we embark on this journey of discovery, let us seek those subtle signs that indicate the proximity of a divine intervention in our story. Guided by Lewis's insights, we will understand how these silent awakenings can trigger profound transformations in our spiritual walk. Amidst the relentless march of life, where days blend into an endless routine, there lies a hidden invitation to awaken. It is not in the clamor of great revelations that we find our decisive moments, but in the quiet corners of our existence, where the mundane meets the mystical. Lewis reminds us that God often chooses the whisper over the whirlwind to capture our attention and stir the depths of our souls. Reflect on the gentle nudge of a persistent thought, the constant echo of an unrealized dream, or the silent discontent pointing to realms beyond our reach. These are not mere fragments of our imagination, but possibly the first threads of a divine tapestry being woven to the fabric of our lives. Lewis would likely argue that our deepest awakenings often emerge from the simplest moments: the sunrise that evokes an unspoken longing, a phrase from a book that resonates deeply in our minds, or a conversation that leaves our spirit restless for something greater. Awakening, in the Lewisian sense, is the nascent realization that the visible world is merely a shadow of a more substantial reality that calls to us. It is the initial stirring of the heart that suggests our role in a grand narrative, a story written by God Himself. This awakening does not shout from the rooftops, but whispers in the silence of our being, inviting us to embark on a journey of discovery and transformation. By paying attention to these subtle signs, we begin to see our lives not as a series of random events, but as a symphony carefully orchestrated by the divine maestro. Every note, every pause plays a crucial role in the developing melody of our existence. The nature of this awakening is not a sudden illumination, but a gradual unveiling, where the scales fall from our eyes, and we are invited to see the world, ourselves, and God in a new light. By embracing these silent awakenings, we open ourselves to the possibility of change, to the divine twists and turns that God weaves into our stories. For it is often in the gentle whisper of God's voice that we find the courage to let go of our old selves and assume the new roles He has written for us in His grand cosmic narrative. C.S. Lewis observed that hardships often prepare ordinary people for extraordinary destinies. This observation serves as a powerful reminder that our trials, though filled with discomfort, are not mere obstacles but crucibles for growth and transformation. In the shadow of suffering, we find not only the harshness of life, but also the potential for divine metamorphosis. For Lewis, suffering was like a megaphone that God uses to awaken a deaf world. It is in our moments of pain and adversity that we often become more receptive to change, more aware of our fragility, and more inclined to seek something beyond ourselves. This receptivity can become the fertile ground from which a new chapter of our story, written by God, begins to emerge. Consider the biblical story of Joseph, who faced betrayal, slavery, and imprisonment, only to be elevated to a position where he could save nations from famine. These challenges were not mere setbacks, but integral parts of a larger narrative that God was weaving. Like Joseph, we may discover that our deepest struggles are not detours, but essential paths to the destiny God has prepared for us. As we face our challenges, we are invited not to despair, but to persevere, with the understanding that our current trials may be the tools God uses to shape us into the characters we need to be for the next scene of our story. It is through suffering that we often acquire the wisdom, strength, and empathy necessary to embrace the roles God has designated for us. In this process, suffering reveals itself not only as a test of our endurance, but as a means by which God awakens the best within us. It calls us to transcend our limits and discover a greater purpose amid the pain. Thus, as we face our challenges with courage and faith, we recognize that each trial is an opportunity to grow and transform, aligning us more deeply with the grand divine plan for our lives. Suffering, then, can be seen as a sign that God is actively working in our lives, pruning us so that we can bear more fruit, just as a gardener tends to his plants. The pain of the pruning process is real, but so is the growth that follows. By embracing our difficulties with faith and courage, we allow God to turn our trials into triumphs, our pain into purpose. C.S. Lewis famously postulated, "If I find in myself desires which nothing in this world can satisfy, the only logical explanation is that I was made for another world." This profound insight sets the stage for our third topic, recognizing our deep and unmet longings as signs that we are destined for something greater, something beyond the mere physical realm. Lewis believed that our deepest desires, those that material pleasures cannot satisfy, are not mere whims of the human condition, but echoes of our true home calling us. These unmet desires, these whispers of something more, serve as indicators that our stories are meant to transcend the confines of this world, pointing to an eternal narrative crafted by the divine. When we experience moments of inexplicable longing, when beauty, love, or a sense of wonder awaken in us an insatiable hunger, we are feeling the pull of eternity in our hearts. These moments should not be dismissed as fleeting emotions, but recognized as signs of our participation in a larger divine story. This longing for more is a beacon, guiding us through the fog of routine and the ephemeral, toward the shores of a deeper spiritual truth. It invites us to explore the possibility that the restlessness we feel is a divine discontent planted within us, to lead us back to God, the source of all fulfillment. Lewis saw suffering and desire as two sides of the same spiritual coin. Both awaken us to a reality beyond our immediate understanding. Suffering humbles us, making us receptive to divine grace, while desire elevates us, calling us toward the fullness that can only be found in God. In this process, our lives become a continuous quest for meaning and connection, shaped by the careful hand of the Creator. Therefore, as we face our trials and recognize our deepest desires, we open our hearts to the possibility of transformation and find a path back to our true home. In our journey with God, these echoes of eternity call us to action, urging us to seek our place in the grand divine narrative. They remind us that we are not merely actors on a worldly stage, but eternal souls shaped for an eternal realm. As we attune our hearts to these divine whispers, we open ourselves to the transformative work God desires to accomplish in and through us. We begin to see our lives not as a series of disconnected events, but as a pilgrimage toward a divine horizon, where every longing finds its fulfillment, and every desire points us back to our Creator. C.S. Lewis had a special talent for recognizing the divine in the ordinary, often suggesting that what we perceive as mere coincidences are in fact the quiet workings of God in our lives. He famously stated, "Coincidences are God's way of remaining anonymous," hinting at the subtle way in which divine orchestration unfolds around us. This topic delves into the concept of providence and serendipitous coincidences, exploring how these unexpected encounters and seemingly random events can actually be signs that God is actively involved in our narrative, gently steering us towards his intended turns. Consider the serendipitous encounters that alter the course of our lives, the unforeseen opportunities that arise exactly when we need them, or the inexplicable timing of events that, in hindsight, fit together too perfectly to be mere coincidences. These moments, often overlooked or dismissed as luck, may very well be God's touches on the canvas of our existence. In Lewis's view, nothing in life is purely fortuitous. Every encounter, every event, is a brushstroke in the masterpiece God is creating. Our moments of serendipity, the encounters that seem so perfectly timed, are signs of a divine hand quietly guiding us. They remind us that we are part of a much larger story than we can imagine, a story written by the Creator himself, where every detail, no matter how insignificant it may seem, has its place and purpose. Therefore, as we navigate the routines of our daily lives, we are invited to be attentive to the divine whispers and touches, to recognize God's presence amid coincidences and improbable circumstances. By doing so, we open our hearts and minds to the wonder of God's providential work in our lives, seeing the extraordinary in the ordinary and the divine in the everyday. Thus, our journey transforms into a dance with the divine, where every step is guided by a loving and omnipotent hand, leading us ever closer to our true home. Lewis would argue that these coincidences are not random, but purposeful, meticulously woven into the fabric of our lives by a loving Creator. They serve as reminders that our stories are not solitary tales, but part of a grand interconnected narrative, where every character and every event plays a role in the unfolding divine drama. We are invited to look beyond the surface to perceive the deeper connections and the guiding hand of God in our journey. This perspective encourages us to trust in the flow of our lives, to remain open to the unexpected, and to find comfort in the knowledge that, even in chaos, there is hidden order, a divine plot in which we play a part. By embracing the providential nature of these happy coincidences, we allow ourselves to become more attuned to the possibilities that God places before us, more willing to follow the clues he provides, and more aware of the ongoing dialogue between our desires and his will. Drawing from the profound thought of C.S. Lewis, our fifth topic explores the transformative power of trusting in God, especially during times of uncertainty and change. Lewis often spoke of faith as a journey through shadowed valleys and sunlit peaks, with trust in God serving as our guiding light. Amid life's turbulence, a deep peace can envelop us, a stillness that defies the chaos of our circumstances. This peace, Lewis might argue, is a tangible sign of God's presence and a reminder of his promise to guide us through the storms. It is in the quiet of our hearts and the silent trust in God's sovereignty that we often find the strength to endure and the courage to embrace the unfolding chapters of our story. Lewis believed that faith is not an escape from reality, but a deeper immersion into it. True faith enables us to see beyond appearances, to recognize God's hand at work in all things, even in difficulties and uncertainties. When we fully trust in God, we allow him to transform our trials into opportunities for growth and our fear into renewed faith. This kind of trust calls us to surrender our anxieties and worries to God, believing that He has a purpose for every circumstance we face. Like a skilled author writing each line with intention, God weaves the joys and sorrows of our lives into a cohesive narrative aimed at our greater good. Therefore, as we face moments of uncertainty, we are invited to keep our hearts open and our minds receptive to divine direction, knowing that He is always with us, guiding us with wisdom and love. Ultimately, trust in God leads us to a deeper understanding of our role in creation. We are not merely passive observers, but active participants in the great story God is telling. Every decision to trust, every act of faith, contributes to the symphony of our lives, which, in the end, echoes the glory of our Creator. As we live with this trust, we discover true peace and purpose, recognizing that, although our lives may be unpredictable, we are secure in the hands of a God who knows exactly where we are and where we are going. This tranquility does not arise from the absence of problems, but from a constant trust in the One who holds our days in His hands. It is a peace that, as Lewis would say, surpasses all understanding, a serene certainty that no matter how the plot unfolds, the author of our faith is with us, guiding every step. Embracing this quiet confidence involves surrendering our need for control, releasing our grip on the pen with which we try to write our own stories. It means finding rest in the knowledge that, although we may not understand every twist and turn, there is a purpose in every line, a reason for every pause. In this posture of trust, we open ourselves to the transformative work God desires to do within us. We allow Him to write His will into our lives, leading us not only to a place of peace amid the storm, but also to a deeper relationship with Him. It is here, in the quiet of trust, that we are truly prepared for the changes God is weaving into our narrative. In the spirit of C.S. Lewis, we explore suffering, longing, providence, and trust, each path revealing signs that God is at work, reshaping our story. Lewis saw the spiritual journey as a dance between the human and the divine, where our weaknesses are shaped by God's strength and our fears transformed into faith. In pain, we find an opportunity to grow. In longing, a call to the eternal. In coincidences, the invisible hand of God. And in trust, a surrender that brings us closer to the heart of the Creator. Embracing this dance means recognizing that every step, every stumble, is part of a larger plan. By yielding to the divine will, we find freedom and joy, even in adversity. Trusting in God is not mere passive acceptance, but an active surrender that transforms us and aligns us with the divine narrative. Thus, as we follow this journey, we are invited to hear God's whispers in our daily lives, to see beauty and order amid chaos, and to find courage and peace in the certainty of His presence. Every challenge becomes an opportunity for growth, every longing a reminder of our true home, and every coincidence a sign that we are being guided by a loving hand. In the end, we discover that true peace is not found in the absence of storms, but in the constant presence of God, who guides and sustains us every step of the way. By trusting in Him, we allow Him to write our story, transforming and shaping us according to His perfect plan. And so, our lives become a living expression of God's glory, a symphony of faith, hope, and love, resounding eternally. Eternally.
May I once again start by putting two pictures, or two stories rather, into your minds. One is the story you have all read, called Beauty and the Beast. The girl, you remember, had to marry a monster for some reason, And she did. She kissed it as if it were a man. And then, much to her relief, it really turned into a man, and all went well. The other story is about someone who had to wear a mask which made him look much nicer than he really was. He had to wear it for a year, and when he took it off, he found his own face had grown to fit it. He was now really beautiful. What had begun as disguise had become a reality. I think both these stories may, in a fanciful way of course, help to illustrate what I have to say in this chapter. Up till now, I have been trying to describe facts, what God is and what he has done. Now I want to talk about practice. What do we do next? What difference does all this theology make? It can start making a difference tonight. If you are interested enough to have read thus far, you are probably interested enough to make a shot at saying your prayers. And whatever else you say, you will probably say the Lord's Prayer. Its very first words are, Our Father. Do you now see what those words mean? They mean, quite frankly, that you are putting yourself in the place of a son of God. To put it bluntly, you are dressing up as Christ. If you like, you are pretending. Because, of course, the moment you realize what the words mean, you realize that you are not a son of God. You are not being like the Son of God, whose will and interests are at one with those of the Father. You are a bundle of self-centered fears, hopes, greeds, jealousies, and self-conceit, all doomed to death. So that, in a way, this dressing up as Christ is a piece of outrageous cheek. But the odd thing is that he has ordered us to do it. Why? What is the good of pretending to be what you are not? Well, even on the human level, you know, there are two kinds of pretending. There is a bad kind, where the pretense is there instead of the real thing. As when a man pretends he is going to help you instead of really helping you. But there is also a good kind, where the pretense leads up to the real thing. When you are not feeling particularly friendly, but know you ought to be, the best thing you can do, very often, is to put on a friendly manner and behave as if you were a nicer person than you actually are. And in a few minutes, as we have all noticed, you will be really feeling friendlier than you were. Very often, the only way to get equality in reality is to start behaving as if you had it already. That is why children's games are so important. They are always pretending to be grown-ups, playing soldiers, playing shop. But all the time, they are hardening their muscles and sharpening their wits, so that the pretense of being grown up helps them to grow up in earnest. Now, the moment you realize, here I am dressing up as Christ, it is extremely likely that you will see at once some way in which, at that very moment, the pretense could be made less of a pretense and more of a reality. You will find several things going on in your mind which would not be going on there if you were really a son of God. Well, stop them. Or you may realize that instead of saying your prayers, you ought to be downstairs writing a letter or helping your wife to wash up. Well, go and do it. You see what is happening. The Christ himself, the Son of God, who is man just like you, and God just like his Father, is actually at your side and is already at that moment beginning to turn your pretense into a reality. This is not merely a fancy way of saying that your conscience is telling you what to do. If you simply ask your conscience, you get one result. If you remember that you are dressing up as Christ, you get a different one. There are lots of things which your conscience might not call definitely wrong, especially things in your mind, but which you will see at once you cannot go on doing if you are seriously trying to be like Christ. For you're no longer thinking simply about right and wrong. You're trying to catch the good infection from a person. It is more like painting a portrait than like obeying a set of rules. And the odd thing is that while in one way it is much harder than keeping rules, in another way it is far easier. The real Son of God is at your side. He is beginning to turn you into the same kind of thing as himself. He is beginning, so to speak, to inject his kind of life and thought, his Zoe, into you, beginning to turn the tin soldier into a live man. The part of you that does not like it is the part that is still tin. Some of you may feel that this is very unlike your own experience. You may say, I've never had the sense of being helped by an invisible Christ, but I often have been helped by other human beings. That is rather like the woman in the first war, who said that if there were a bread shortage, it would not bother her house, because they always ate toast. If there is no bread, there will be no toast. If there were no help from Christ, there would be no help from other human beings. He works on us in all sorts of ways, not only through what we think our religious life. He works through nature, through our own bodies, through books, sometimes through experiences which seem, at the time, anti-Christian. When a young man who has been going to church in a routine way honestly realizes that he does not believe in Christianity and stops going, provided he does it for honesty's sake and not just to annoy his parents, the Spirit of Christ is probably nearer to him then than it ever was before. But above all, he works on us through each other. Men are mirrors or carriers of Christ to other men, sometimes unconscious carriers. This good infection can be carried by those who have not got it themselves. People who were not Christians themselves help me to Christianity. But usually it is those who know him that bring him to others. That is why the church, the whole body of Christians, showing him to one another, is so important. You might say that when two Christians are following Christ together, there is not twice as much Christianity as when they are apart, but 16 times as much. But do not forget this. At first, it is natural for a baby to take its mother's milk without knowing its mother. It is equally natural for us to see the man who helps us without seeing Christ behind him. But we must not remain babies. We must go on to recognize the real giver. It is madness not to, because if we do not, we shall be relying on human beings, and that is going to let us down. The best of them will make mistakes. All of them will die. We must be thankful to all the people who have helped us. We must honor them and love them. But never, never pin your whole faith on any human being. Not if he is the best and wisest in the whole world. There are lots of nice things you can do with sand. But do not try building a house on it. And now we begin to see what it is that the New Testament is always talking about. It talks about Christians being born again. It talks about them putting on Christ, about Christ being formed in us, about our coming to have the mind of Christ. Put right out of your head the idea that these are only fancy ways of saying that Christians are to read what Christ said and try to carry it out, as a man may read what Plato or Marx said and try to carry it out. They mean something much more than that. They mean that a real person, Christ, here and now, in that very room where you are saying your prayers, is doing things to you. It is not a question of a good man who died 2,000 years ago. It is a living man, still as much a man as you, and still as much God as he was when he created the world, really coming and interfering with your very self, killing the old natural self in you and replacing it with the kind of self he has. At first, only for moments, then for longer periods. Finally, if all goes well, turning you permanently into a different sort of thing, into a new little Christ, a being which in its own small way has the same kind of life as God, which shares in his power, joy, knowledge, and eternity. And soon we make two other discoveries. We begin to notice, beside our particular sinful acts, our sinfulness. Begin to be alarmed not only about what we do, but about what we are. This may sound rather difficult, so I will try to make it clear from my own case. When I come to my evening prayers and try to reckon up the sins of the day, 9 times out of 10, the most obvious one is some sin against charity. I have sulked or snapped or sneered or snubbed or stormed. And the excuse that immediately springs to my mind is that the provocation was so sudden and unexpected. I was caught off my guard. I had not time to collect myself. Now that may be an extenuating circumstance as regards those particular acts. They would obviously be worse if they had been deliberate and premeditated. On the other hand, surely what a man does when he has taken off his guard is the best evidence for what sort of a man he is. Surely what pops out before the man has time to put on a disguise is the truth. If there are rats in a cellar, you are most likely to see them if you go in very suddenly. But the suddenness does not create the rats. It only prevents them from hiding. In the same way, the suddenness of the provocation does not make me an ill-tempered man. It only shows me what an ill-tempered man I am. The rats are always there in the cellar, but if you go in shouting and noisily, they will have taken cover before you switch on the light. Apparently, the rats of resentment and vindictiveness are always there in the cellar of my soul. Now, that cellar is out of reach of my conscious will. I can to some extent control my acts. I have no direct control over my temperament. And if, as I said before, what we are matters even more than what we do, if indeed what we do matters chiefly as evidence of what we are, then it follows that the change which I most need to undergo is a change that my own direct voluntary efforts cannot bring about. And this applies to my good actions too. How many of them were done for the right motive? How many for fear of public opinion or a desire to show off? How many from a sort of obstinacy or sense of superiority, which in different circumstances might equally have led to some very bad act? But I cannot, by direct moral effort, give myself new motives. After the first few steps in the Christian life, we realize that everything which really needs to be done in our souls can be done only by God. And that brings us to something which has been very misleading in my language up to now. I have been talking as if it were we who did everything. In reality, of course, it is God who does everything. We, at most, allow it to be done to us. In a sense, you might even say, it is God who does the pretending. The three-personal God, so to speak, sees before him, in fact, a self-centered, greedy, grumbling, rebellious human animal. But he says, let us pretend that this is not a mere creature, but our Son. It is like Christ, insofar as it is a man, for he became man. Let us pretend that it is also like him in spirit. Let us treat it as if it were what in fact it is not. Let us pretend in order to make the pretense into a reality. God looks at you as if you were a little Christ. Christ stands beside you to turn you